Hey, happy birthday, America.
Birthday, America. Happy 4th of July, brother.
Yeah, we got a special one today.
We do. It is Independence Day. You are watching the Crucible Podcast, episode, where are we at, 44?
44. And stay tuned to the end. We'll talk a little bit about a little giveaway, 5 ounces of silver.
You got some silver we're giving away. You got
A
that?
little bit. Yep.
All right. What are you doing tonight? Real quick. Where are you going? What are you doing?
Oh, tonight.
You sending any chickens up in the air?
Not today, man.
Today, tomorrow, tonight.
Eventually, at some point. Yeah, I'll be launching something up in the air. Yeah.
All right, dude.
What do we got?
We have a guest on tonight who has been seen a lot around. I don't know if you watched it. I think it was a week, almost 10 days ago, a 2-part Kitco podcast interview, Mr. Andy Schectman from Miles Franklin. And we want to bring him up and have a little conversation with this gentleman right here. Thank you, Andy, for being with us today.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Fine, fellas. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Now, what we'd like you to do to start this whole thing off with, if someone out there in the YouTube land involved in precious metals doesn't know who you are or the company that you and, from what I understand, your father built, if you would do us the favor, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Miles Franklin before we kick things off.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good way. I often tell this little story. It's a good way, I think, to put a frame of reference into the way that I look at gold. My father and I started this company together on a wing and a prayer in 1989, going on 35 years. His middle name is Miles, his best buddy, who lent us $60,000 in 1989 before the internet, in a one-room office the size of a closet. Middle name was Franklin. I guess you could say we're the embodiment of the American dream. My family comes from nowhere, from nothing. My parents sold their life insurance policies, and along with that loan, we started a company on a wing and a prayer. We recently eclipsed 10 billion in sales. We've never had a customer complaint ever.
Wow.
In over 34 years. But when I started with my dad as a young man at 19 years old, barely 20, he said to me, look, there's going to be one rule and only one rule. And this puts a frame of reference in everything we'll talk about tonight in the way that I look at metals. And he said, look, I won't let you make the same mistakes I did. I'll fire you if you don't do this one rule. And that is, every 2 weeks when you get paid, you'll pay yourself first. You'll buy some gold. You'll buy some silver. I don't care if it's 1 ounce of silver. You'll do it, or I'll fire you. Now, that was almost 35 years ago. I've owned the company more or less outright for 2 decades. He won't fire me anymore, but I've honored my promise to my father, which is actually the greatest gift I've ever been given, you guys. The lesson of allowing the laws of compounding to work in your favor rather than against you. And so for me, gold and silver are not investments. They are wealth that has outlived every world war, or 2 of them, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, anything the world's ever thrown at it. And here we are, 5,000 years later. And over the last 3 years, the central banks of the world have bought more gold than at any time in human history, and or in central bank history, I guess is fair to say. So the more things change, the more they say the same. But I guess the moral of the story is, to me, I don't tell people to buy gold and silver to become wealthy. It is wealth. If you own enough of it, sure, you'll be wealthy. But I think that is a good place to start from, is that I look at it as money, plain and simply.
That's fantastic. And we know that the U.S. as a whole has kind of gotten away from precious metals and kind of delved more into fractional reserve banking and fiat currency, et cetera. I want to kind of dive in a little bit into BRICS, knowing a little bit about what BRICS is, who they are, and what they are attempting to do. In the last week, I think the Peruvian president met with China. And I know Mexico is also in talks with joining BRICS. And those are, 2 huge producers of both gold and silver, and they're right in our backyard. What implications could that have to the precious metals market?
Well, massive. I mean, Peru is the 3rd largest producer of silver in the world, and they're part of the Belt Road Initiative. I do believe China is building a very advanced deep water port in Peru. The common theme of all the countries that, whether you see it on the Belt Road, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history connecting Asia, Africa, South America, and parts of Europe, the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all of these unions that China is really spearheading and part of in a cooperative manner are very much not only resource rich, but also shipping lane and trade route strategic. It's huge. And if you look at how important commodities are to these nations, their center focus on really everything. In fact, as it is right now, there was a meeting in Novigrad last week or 2 weeks ago that the Saudi crown prince actually turned down at the same time the invitation to the G7 and sent his delegates to the meeting in Novigrad, where 59 countries said they're going to apply to BRICS. But as it is right now, just with the 10, they already have a larger swath of human population, of global GDP, of military might, with 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet. They control the majority of all of the rare earths. In fact, JP Morgan just wrote a report saying that China produces roughly 80% of all the rare earths, but refines 100%. The Chinese bought the London Metals Exchange, which is the exchange that trades base metals, copper, zinc, lead, steel, that kind of stuff. They're striking deals all around the world in commodities, whether it be soft like corn and soybeans and wheat, or hard like base metals, or strategic like precious metals. And it's a trend that we see growing by the day. And what just came out of this meeting in Novigrad, to me, is something we should talk about. I think it is a massive, massive, massive game changer. This is my focus. I have talked about this stuff for almost 4 years and in about 4,000 YouTube videos, all on this topic. But what we see right now, what just happened with Saudi Arabia becoming a full participant in Project Enbridge, and the announcement by the head, Delma Rousseff, the head of the BRICS New Development Bank, that in principle they've agreed upon a settlement currency called the unit. And what it implies and what it's all about is the beginning of the end of the dollar hegemony. And in fact, we could argue that's already over.
Yeah.
Perhaps the chipping away at the dollar supremacy. And I don't think there's anything more important, you guys, to talk about on a macro scale than what's happening with the BRICS and the de-dollarization, the de-treasurization, and the way that we are looked at on the global stage.
Right. And for somebody who's just tuning in and they're unfamiliar with what a CBDC is, can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. And that's part of Project Enbridge. A CBDC is a central bank digital currency. The Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank on the planet, who seems to have their finger in a lot of the things I'm talking about, really wanted every country to have a operational CBDC by 2025. The United States is not immune to that request. The number 2 economic advisor to the U.S. government is a woman named Lael Brainerd. Interesting lady. She spent time at the Treasury. She worked at the Fed underneath Powell. She was number 2 underneath him. When he was up for reappointment after Biden took office, she ran against him, ended up becoming vice chair, and she worked with MIT in the development of the United States CBDC when Biden signed an executive order to fast track its development. And she just ran point for the issuance of FedNow, which is out there. And there's I don't know how many, half a dozen banks or so that are piloting it. And it's Venmo and Zelle on steroids backed by the Fed. It would replace, in theory, checks and wires. It's instant settlement, just like that. You go to a car dealership, you sit there for 2 hours negotiating, and instead of getting up and having to go to the bank to send them a wire, I just FedNow you, it's in your account. That's the premise of it. If somehow the Democrats win the next election, she will be the head of the Federal Reserve. It is my opinion. She's a modern monetary theorist. She wants a central bank digital currency, but we are seeing central bank digital currencies pop up everywhere. The digital yuan, as an example, is being used quite a bit over Project Enbridge. And what we are seeing happen is, for example, they will pay the Saudis in in the digital yuan for oil that is then immediately convertible back into the Shanghai Gold Exchange for gold bars, kilo bars, and a cash and carry exchange. And I think it's very important to really understand what gold is to understand that the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, in 2019 reclassified it as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. And that's a big deal, right? For 70 years, it was the US dollar and US treasuries. And then out of nowhere, well, the BIS reclassified it as tier 1. But before that happened in 2017, we saw several banks, starting with the German Bundesbank, say to the world, give us back all of our gold. The Bank of Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, the Czech National Bank, all of these banks that give us back our gold. And well, when this happened, when we saw this happen in 2017, it was in the midst of a 6-year downdraft in gold. It was unusual that these central banks were making such a big deal about getting their gold back. The following year, those same banks in 18 bought more gold as a group than they did combined in the previous 60 years combined. 2019, they bought 100% more than they did the year before. And then miraculously out of nowhere, the BIS said, oh, by the way, guys, gold is now a tier 1 asset. And we are seeing their footprint in something even bigger than that right now, which we'll get to as it relates to CBDCs and Project Enbridge. I think it's also important to understand for your listeners that, when we ask what makes the dollar, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency, it's had several cycles. The first would have been in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire at the end of World War II when we took over for the pound sterling and our dollar was backed by gold, where foreign governments could exchange those dollars at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce whenever they wanted. And it was right near the Vietnam War, or the end of it in 71, where de Gaulle from France said they're printing more dollars to fund the war, their guns and butter initiative, than they have. So let's call their bluff. And he sent warships to New York Harbor filled with dollar bills and said, give us back gold. And we did. But that's when Nixon closed the gold window and the dollar was backed by nothing. Well, it was just a few years later that Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia to strike a deal with the Saudis. This was the petrodollar deal, maybe Bretton Woods 2, we'll call it loosely. And that would be where we promised to protect the Saudis and by extension OPEC. And for that, they would value globally oil in dollars and take all of the excess reserves and recycle them into U.S. treasuries. It's been that way for 50 years, you guys, and it's created a synthetic demand for the U.S. dollar. It has allowed us to live well beyond our means because every country in the world must stockpile them in order to buy oil. Well, about 3 weeks ago, the Saudis decided not to re-up this agreement for exclusivity, right? But I go back to 2019 when we left Afghanistan in a way that is very un-American, with 3,000 Americans behind enemy lines, leaving billions of dollars of equipment into the hands of the enemies. That was not lost on the rest of the world. And this is when everything began to snowball, when Saudi Arabia signed a military protection agreement with Russia. And I exclaimed at that point, game's over. And it's been this progression ever since that we have seen, in particular, watching Saudi Arabia and the things that they have done that will define the shape of things to come. And that's really what I think we should talk about as we move forward here.
Yeah. And so, for instance, Saudi Arabia, I guess my question is, was that agreement, the OPEC agreement, was that set in stone that the trades had to be conducted in dollars, or were they still allowing it as just wasn't as common to occur in other currencies?
Well, it was
like
pretty much a given. It was pretty much a given. Nearly 90% of all oil transactions, if not closer to 100 for the last 50 years, have been done in dollars. And because it was the most liquid currency, and it was a market that had demand, and the treasury market was the most stable, the most liquid, and it just was. There was nothing to rise to challenge it. Well, that would have been Bretton Woods 2. And a man that I follow a lot named Zoltan Pozsar, a brilliant man, was a part of the New York Federal Reserve. He knows the plumbing of the financial system better than anyone I've ever encountered. And now he works at UBS. He says we're now in Bretton Woods 3, a system that will be all about transparency. To me, I view that as blockchain and commodities. And if you look at the amount of commodities that are being accumulated, it becomes very concerning. But going back to the Saudis, so, they sign a military protection agreement with Russia. A few days after that, so does Nigeria, another OPEC producer. And subsequently, over the last couple of years, we've seen Saudi Arabia join the BRICS join the Belt Road Initiative along with every single OPEC country. And this is when I really started digging into this. I'm like, well, that's not good if every OPEC country is on the Belt Road, every one of them. And, you know, shortly after that, they joined the BRICS. They applied and now have been formally admitted last year. They joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the largest regional financial and military organization in the world. They joined the BRICS New Development Bank. And then they told the world that we will take other currencies for oil while at Davos last year. And that was really very shocking, but not as shocking as actually not re-upping the petro agreement. Now, if you realize Zoltan says this is all about commodities, Bretton Woods 3, I'm going to show you just how crazy this is becoming. And, you know, what Saudi Arabia just did the other day in becoming a full participant in Project Enbridge is a massive deal. Project Enbridge is a cross-border digital payment system that was developed by China, Hong Kong, United Arab Emirates, who was also admitted into the BRICS last year, and Thailand. And sorry about that. They always do this. It goes without fail. Anyways, Project Enbridge is also backed by the Bank of International Settlements, the same group that said gold is a tier 1 asset. And while at this meeting in Russia, in Novograd, 2 weeks ago, the Russian finance minister, who really turned me on to the fact that, 3 years ago, Sergei Glaziev said, look, the BRICS will have a currency that will be a basket of commodities and a basket of local currencies. And for 3 years, I have said that is what's going to happen. It just makes great sense. I think he's kind of narrowed it down to gold as the only tier 1 asset in that basket. And he has come out, and he and Putin and Delma Rousseff, the head of the BRICS and Development Bank, came out and publicly said, in principle, we've agreed upon a new currency for settlement called the unit, and it will trade on Project Enbridge. The unit is, again, backed by 40% gold. And what's interesting about the unit, if you read the white paper, which I did, it says that the gold and the currency that is minted into a unit token, if you will, by these countries will be kept in an escrow account pulled out of circulation in the borders within those countries. So they don't have to give up their gold, which is something that I found very interesting. Very strict penalties for not adhering to the standards of the unit, and independently audited continuously. Now, what's very interesting when you realize the implications of all of this, over the past 2 years, we've seen, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Argentina, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, Belgium, Egypt, Senegal, Romania, Nigeria, Poland, Ghana, India, Turkey, France, Serbia, Venezuela, Algeria, Cameroon, South Africa, and Czechoslovakia all repatriate their gold from the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. The Bank of England gives access immediate to the LBMA, the London Bullion Metals Association, and by extension, the New York Fed, COMEX, to repatriate their gold the way that they have signals mistrust in the system. Absolutely. But think of what is happening here. Saudi Arabia being a full participant in Enbridge, and Enbridge is not compatible with US dollars. And if indeed the BRICS are going to issue a common settlement currency where Enbridge allows all of these countries to maintain their monetary authority, to be autonomous from a common currency like the US dollar, each country will be able to take on their economic affairs for themselves, use their own central bank digital currency, for which they will have to be prudent in the way they employ monetary and fiscal policy so that it doesn't distort their ability to mint these tokens, the unit tokens, which will be 60% currency of the current currencies involved in the BRICS countries and gold. And it will be kept at home. You look at India, they just purchased 1.5 times the amount of gold in the first 4 months of 2024 than they did all of last year, and they repatriated all of it, along with 100 metric tons that they've held in the Bank of England since 1991. So what we are seeing right now is a situation where gold is being remonetized across the globe, and it will be part of a new settlement system that the BRICS will introduce. There is a special meeting in China in September to go over the unit with intentions of issuing it or having the perhaps the rollout in the big meeting in October, where 59 more countries have already applied or say they are going to formally apply. On top of Brazil, the original BRICS being Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Last year we saw Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates join as full participants. So this is a trend that is growing. But if you realize the impetus for selling treasuries and accumulating gold, for several reasons. One, gold has outperformed the treasury market for the last 25 years. It has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury. But when you can go across the globe and say to China, Madam Secretary, she says, Janet Yellen, if you give 1 penny to Russia, we're okay with you guys being friends, Xi and Putin. But if you give 1 penny to the Russian war machine, we will sanction your banks, your companies in Beijing itself. Never mind that we've given $260 billion to the Ukraine and Stinger missiles and F-16s and the intelligence on where to fire said missiles, but we don't count. So the rest of the world looks at the United States as hypocritical and tyrannical, and a country that is accumulating $1 trillion in debt per 100 days, where it took 200 years to do it the first time. So all of these countries are massively stockpiling gold and repatriating it from the centers that they've held it forever. And they are selling treasuries, which is propping up the long end of the bond market, and buying gold at a level no one has ever seen before and repatriating it. Now, one last piece to this puzzle is we keep hearing the head of the Dutch National Bank keeps talking about the gold revaluation account. In fact, he just publicly said again, our balance sheet is turning negative, but we have the gold revaluation account. We have 20 billion euro in the gold revaluation account. Every single central bank holding of gold across the globe is held in an account, ironically called the gold revaluation account. And basically what he's intimating is that all they need to do is revalue gold to a very, very high level, because as it is right now, the rule says that they are not allowed to offset gold that they hold on their balance sheet against liabilities. So they have gold as an asset on one end in their asset, and the revaluation account for the exact same amount in the liability side, they offset, i.e. balance. All they need to do is change that rule and revalue gold. Now, people say that that's crazy. Well, that's exactly what Roosevelt did right over my shoulder when he confiscated gold and devalued the dollar by 40%, thereby increasing the value of gold by 40%. We're seeing right now in China, silver is being priced almost $4 an ounce higher in Shanghai on the metals exchange than it is on the COMEX or the LBMA. We just saw the formation of the BRICS grain exchange. I want to read you one thing about this, because it all underscores they understand what's happening. Basically, it says the ministry insists that the BRICS countries are the largest grain producers and exporters, but have no leverage to influence the prices of the agricultural commodities critical for their food security. The BRICS commodity exchange will solve this problem. Moscow seeks to move away from trading grain for U.S. dollars in favor of national currencies of the BRICS member states, as global prices are primarily determined on the Chicago Commodity Exchange. So they understand that the prices are, whether it be of metal, which is being drained out of the LBMA or the COMEX, or the commodities, which is valued on the COMEX, they understand what we have been doing. And so they are building exchanges across the globe for commodities. They bought the London Metals Exchange, which is the largest exchange for base metals on the planet. They're striking deals all across the globe. They're buying gold at levels the world has never seen, which is what? The only other tier one asset. And they are repatriating it, bringing it home, removing it from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. And the dollar is not compatible with Enbridge. Saudi Arabia is a full participant in MBridge. The BRICS are going to use this new settlement currency. Every one of these countries has been stockpiling dollars and treasuries, and guess what? Now they don't need to. And so if indeed the Dutch central banker, the head of it, is correct, and they do revalue gold, let's say all of a sudden these exchanges in Moscow, in Dubai, in Shanghai, which, by the way, over the last 75 days has seen the increase in volume on the Shanghai Metals Exchange increase by 200%, effectively now the second most actively traded metals exchange on the planet, surpassing the COMEX. If they revalue gold to a level, let's say 5,000, 10,000, who knows what it is, it would make sense because you've seen all of these central banks massively accumulate gold. At the same time, they're accumulating debt. All they need to do is revalue gold, and this is part of a new system. It is a tier 1 asset, the only other one. And so if you put all of these dots together, my guess is that we are on the precipice of some very scary things where the world realizes that they don't need to stockpile dollars anymore, and it would be in their best interest to stockpile gold because it will be part of a new settlement currency where the major producers of energy and commodities on the planet will be trading in it, not in US dollars, and not putting the excess into US treasuries anymore. So yeah, it is a big deal, you guys. In fact, I think it's the biggest deal of all of our lives in this country, because if we lose the petro status, things get very, very scary as everyone on the planet dumps dollars. And as that happens, and all those dollars come flooding home and hit our shores, the byproduct of that inflation is a spike in interest rates. You can't have 15, 18% inflation and 5% interest rates, your currency dies. But what would 15% interest rates controlled by the market, not by the Fed, what would that look like? Well, that's the Great Reset. That's the Klaus Schwab moment where stocks, bonds, real estate, the banks that are over leveraged and undercapitalized, the insurance companies loaded with treasuries, it all collapses along with the dollar. And the reason that I have been following this path is that you can't make it up that the lead economic advisor for our government is a man named Jared Bernstein, who advocates for the loss of the petro status. Many of your listeners may have seen his bumbling rant on Twitter, how he tried to explain money creation and bond sales, but he advocates for losing the reserve status. So by weaponizing the dollar and stealing the Russian assets, let's call it what it is, to buy munitions to give to the Ukraine, the country that Russia is fighting in a war, we took 5 billion of their assets to sign an executive order to go green. You couldn't, in my opinion, initiate a departure from the dollar as the petrodollar any better than they did. And the question is, why would they do this? And that's, we can get into that, but I think this is too stupid to be stupid. Everything they have done, whether it be outside our borders or inside our borders, with immigration, with the elections, with the judicial system, all of these things have question marks around it, with lawlessness in the cities, with all of the things that, on top of producing $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. And you guys, 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. And we have printed 12 trillion in debt in the past 4 years. That's more than every bit of debt we've created in the history before. So yeah, things are about to get real interesting. And I think people have no idea how interesting it could potentially get.
Now, taking everything you just mentioned, are there any arrows in the United States quiver left to salvage this, to prevent it from getting to the tipping point where, this BRICS currency takes over and, gold steps up into its rightful place and the dollar is dethroned? What else can the U.S. do to either prolong this or prevent it from happening altogether?
I don't know. And that's the truth. I don't know if we've crossed the Rubicon. They talk about a $35 trillion debt, and that's pretty bad. But what about the 99 trillion shortfall in Medicare Part B and the $22 trillion shortfall in Medicare Part D and the $77 trillion shortfall in Social Security, along with government and military pensions? We're broken. We're insolvent. I've been, ever since I moved here from Minnesota, I've been besieged, especially this time of year, with Florida allergies. Never had them before, and they hit me really hard sometimes at night. My eyes start to water. It's here's the deal. Do you know what the largest asset is of the U.S. government?
I would almost say people.
No, the largest asset of the United States government balance sheet is student debt of $1.6 trillion. As sickening as that sounds, we have $5 trillion in assets. The government does, not the country, but the government does. $5 trillion in assets, the largest being student debt of $1.6 trillion. We are broke. We are insolvent. And what I'm saying to you is, why would they do this? So my mentor, Richard Russell, used to always say 20 years ago that the Fed is backed into a corner, having already created $17 trillion in debt at this point, that they have two choices: to inflate or default. Inflate or die, he always used to say. Well, what about the third option? And that is to create a villain, to find a really big, bad boogeyman, Xi Jinping, Putin, and OPEC. Because if you look at it, the interesting thing is the unfunded liabilities, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government, military, pensions, who's that owed to? That's us. It's owed to the American people.
Sure.
The $35 trillion debt, roughly $7.5 trillion is owed to foreigners. But who's been selling all the treasuries and buying gold? Oh yeah, that's them. That'd be China, Japan, Saudi. Japan is at a crossroads. They're probably gonna have to start dumping treasuries to save their currency, or they're just gonna collapse. And they've been the largest accumulator of our treasuries, as China has gone from 3 trillion to 700 billion. All of these countries are selling treasuries and buying gold, which has no counterparty risk and is what? The only other tier 1 reserve asset. So who's been buying all the treasuries? Oh yeah, that's us. The banks, the mutual funds, the hedge funds, the money markets, and all of us chasing yield. So if you realize that we have 5 trillion in assets and nearly 200 trillion in debt, that will never be paid off. You either inflate, or you default, or you find a villain. That villain is, as I mentioned, OPEC and Xi Jinping and Putin, for dumping the dollar, and every country in the world no longer having to accumulate dollars to own oil. As every one of those countries dump dollars, it creates hyperinflation. And interest rates spike to the moon to compensate. Everything blows up. But remember, the number one economic advisor to this country, he wrote a report called Dethrone King Dollar. He has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work, and he is our lead economic advisor. He prides himself on understanding inclusion as it relates to economics, and he's a modern monetary theorist who can't explain bond creation and money creation, or bond sales and money creation, yet he says it's a privilege we can no longer afford because of all of the distortions. So you weaponize the dollar, first sign an executive order to go green. Sorry, you guys, we're all good. Saudi, you guys go hang out with 90% of the world who's not going green, but we're gonna. And then you weaponize the dollar, and then you destabilize the border. You create lawlessness in the cities. You create divisiveness amongst the country. You have people who look at what made this country great, the fair elections and the judicial system, and people look at it cross-eyed. I don't know. And then that's not lost on the rest of the world. And all of these things together make it easy for the world to find safety and unity in numbers. And if that happens and rates spike and everything collapses, now we have a villain. And guess what? The majority of the debt is owed to us. But have no fear, because Lael Brainerd, the number 2, is here with her CBDC that she created with MIT. All you need to do, you guys, is sign on the dotted line, and all that money that you lost in your insurance policies and your bank account, your 401k, well, guess what? I'm a modern monetary theorist. My name's Lael Brainerd. Sign on the dotted line and we'll make you whole. How do you get people to take a CBDC when no one wants to? You create an event, and you create an event that is centered around a villain and unifying the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the only thing. Look, everything I've said to you up till this point is factual. Is it too stupid to be stupid? Does Occam's razor say, why would you do these things and not expect there to be consequences? Sure. There's something that you guys should Google. It's called the Cloward-Piven theory. And the Cloward-Piven theory was a theory. It was a class taught in Columbia University by a husband and wife professor, Cloward and Piven, in Columbia University in the 60s. And it's, I'm going to put my glasses on here so I can give you the exact definition of it. But guess who went to Columbia University in the 60s and shortly thereafter? Would have been Obama, would have been Jared Bernstein, Madeleine Albright, Bill Barr, Eric Holder, all sorts of these politicians. But here's what the Cloward-Piven theory says, and you tell me if this sounds familiar. The Cloward-Piven theory is a political strategy outlined by sociologists and political activists Richard Clown and Francis Piven in 1966 article titled "The Weight of the Poor: A Strategy to End Poverty," published in the magazine The Nation. Again, they were also professors at Columbia. Anyways, it is aimed at creating a political crisis by overwhelming the U.S. welfare system with demands, thereby forcing reforms and the implementation of a guaranteed national income. Key elements. 1, overloading the welfare system. The strategy suggests that by enrolling large numbers of people in welfare programs, in particular in the large cities, the system would become overwhelmed and eventually collapse. This would create a political and social crisis that would necessitate substantial reforms. Well, the inner cities and the influx of 18 million people, that does the trick. The goal was to generate a crisis significant enough to push the government to adopt more radical measures to address poverty and inequality. Jared Bernstein and Lael Brainerd both talk about inequality and inclusion in their bios in terms of their economic policy. Advocating for a guaranteed income, Cloward and Piven proposed that the ultimate solution to the crisis would be the implementation of a guaranteed annual income for all citizens, ensuring a minimum standard of living and reducing poverty. The strategy emphasized goals to create a new loyal voting bloc out of the rapidly increasing welfare recipients and of their children who can all be counted on to vote for larger government in the future. So I don't know if it's just coincidental that they went there and this sounds like what is happening. But my point to you is, why the hell would we do these things? Why would we weaponize the dollar and not expect there to be blowback? Steal the Russian treasuries, which you could say we defaulted on, and give the proceeds in weapons to the Ukraine. Why would we sign an executive order to go green? Why would we make people think the judicial system and the electoral system is what it is? And why would we let 18 million people in here illegally? All of these things make no sense. And why would we create $1 trillion in debt every 100 days? All of these things were destroying what this country once was. And you put it together with now Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS, all of the OPEC countries on the Belt Road, a new currency that is backed by the IMF, that is a digital currency that the dollar is not compatible with, that cannot be weaponized, and a settlement currency so all of these countries can have their own economic autonomy and their monetary policy, and yet have to adhere to a set of rules to settle with all of these countries for energy. And all of the commodities that are being accumulated by these folks, rare earths, precious metals, base metals, soft commodities like wheat and corn, they're building the BRICS grain exchange. Put it together, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that we are at the foothills of some very scary times, as far as I'm concerned.
So I'd actually never thought of, I guess it never crossed my mind, what the effect of a UBI would be on the price of gold. What would you see that doing? Would it make gold go up, or?
Well, I mean, if we come to first of all, if the United States did universal basic income and became a socialist country, I mean, you can just kiss the dollar goodbye as being the world reserve in any respect, or the center of free trade, or to be used for settlement. And so, yeah, I mean, in dollar terms, look, it's important to understand that gold doesn't go anywhere. Gold sits on the ledge of the bathtub. It's the water underneath it that's the currency. You pull the plug on the water on the bathtub, the water starts to drop, as is the value of your currency. Gold didn't go anywhere. Gold just sits there. And it's been that way forever. I mean, if you look over my shoulder, there's a $20 gold piece right there and a $20 gold certificate, and a 10 and a 50 and 100. By the way, those gold certificates on the bottom, they don't say "In God We Trust." They say "Payable to the bearer on demand" in gold coin. But if we go back to, back then, 1900, $20 gold coin or an ounce of gold would have bought you, $20 would have bought you a finely tailored man's suit. $20 today won't even buy you a tie, but that ounce of gold will sure do the trick at $2,400. I can give you a million examples on that. You go to 1960, where the average price of a house was $17,000. Gold was $39 an ounce. So do you take the 435 ounces of gold that you would put in to buy that house and have no mortgage in 1960, or do you stick it under your mattress, earning nothing but dust for the past 60 years? And let's say you decided to do that. The average price of a house today, call it $400,000 in the United States. What's 435 ounces of gold worth? That's over $1 million. Now buys you over 2 houses, earn nothing but dust. And when you look at what gold has done since 2000, it's averaged 9.9% compounding per year, outpacing everything except Bitcoin, which started from zero, but even outpacing the S&P 500 with dividends reinvested. It's the tortoise, not the hare. But when you have a Federal Reserve who wants us all to believe that we should have a 2% inflation, why 2%? How about negative 2%? Because the lower the inflation, the better the standard of living. They want us to believe it's 2%, yet the CPI, you should pull the P out. It's a CP lie, rather. It's a BLS, pull the L out of Bureau of Labor Statistics, should be BS, because there's a man named John Williams of Shadow Stats. So all he does is tell us what the inflation rate and the unemployment rates were prior to 1980 when they started changing everything. John will tell you inflation's 11 or 12% right now, not the 3 they want us to believe. And so if you at 11%, the law of 70 seconds tells you in six years or 6.5 years, your currency will lose. It will lose 50% of its value. Other way of looking at it is it tells you how long before your principal will double. If you're paying a loan at 7%, in 10.2 years it doubles, or the value does. At a bond at 7%, in 10.2 years it doubles. At 18% in 4 years it doubles. So when you talk about a 2% inflation rate, go back to my dad graduated college in 1963 or 4. He told me his dream was to have a job paying $10,000 a year. And the first Stingray Corvette he bought in 73 was $6,500. Now they're 120.
Oh yeah.
So it's not that gold goes higher. It's that the currencies are being inflated away out from underneath us. And it is the barometer by which we measure the health of a currency.
That's fantastic. And so you were mentioning just a moment ago the price of what things were back then in gold, let's say 80, 100 years ago. Knowing that in this state of the U.S., state of the economy, that gold and silver tend to be a little less liquid, or a lot less liquid as far as the physical state of it, right, versus paper trading. How do you address those concerns with your investors as far as ease of buying and selling precious metals, especially in like a down market?
Well, I think people should watch The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb and then come back to me on that, because what you will see is that counterparty risk will become a very dirty phrase in the coming months and years ahead. And what gold offers is an asset that is viewed as a tier 1 asset world over and has no counterparty liability. And that's why the central banks are pulling it back. Actually, gold has tremendous liquidity, but you have to move it somewhere physically. So to your point, I understand that. And again, that's why I would say it is not it is not an investment. It's wealth. It's not something that you want to buy and then start trading with all over the place. But what it is an asset that has pretty much been the number 1 performing asset, with the exception of Bitcoin, for the last 25 years, if you annualize it, and has no counterparty risk, no counterparty liability. That's a very big deal. Look, AIG was bailed out in 2008 because they are the reinsurer with credit default swaps insuring the banks. And if they didn't, we were staring into the abyss, evidently. And I don't know if your listeners know this. They really ought to. First of all, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb on YouTube. You can watch it or read the book. Do it. It'll scare the hell out of you. Do it. I strongly suggest it. But in 2009, when the Dodd-Frank law happened, the law was passed that banks will never be bailed out again. Now, you may be saying, well, what about Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank? And I'll mention that in a moment. But the law said bailouts are illegal. They will need to be bailed in. Bail-in
Right.
legislation is inside of the new inside of the Dodd-Frank Act that says you are an unsecured general creditor of the bank, i.e. last to be paid. That it is a loan, you're making an unsecured loan to the bank when you deposit money. It is not, you're not depositing it, you're lending the money to the bank. And they also implemented money market gating in legislation in the Dodd-Frank Act because Lehman Brothers owned many or was running many of the money markets, and it's called breaking the buck. A show that I'm on every Tuesday, Liberty and Finance, Dunnigan Kaiser and I were talking about this publicly a few weeks ago, and he said he still has not received all of his money back from his money market that when it went upside down in 2008. Never got it back. He was gated. He could not get his money out. It went upside down. Lehman went upside down, never got all his money back. And when you talk about bail-in legislation, it is real. The banks in 2020 were told by the president and the Fed they could relinquish all reserve requirements. So just about every bank in the United States has virtually zero in reserves. They take the money that you give them and they would like to make loans, but we're not seeing much in the way of loans. So they buy treasuries with it and make the spread between what they give you and what they're receiving. This is how they got into big trouble, of course, by having all of those treasuries and then the Fed raising rates by 500 basis points. But bail-in legislation is real. And it basically says that if a bank goes upside down, anything over FDIC is gone and goes in to pay the indiscretions of the bank. And FDIC is a scam. There's 148 billion backing 18 trillion in deposits. And if you realize that if you see a major bank fail and it gets bailed in, the panic that will ensue in this country where most people have no idea that's even a law will blow people's minds. So when Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank were bailed out, there was an inquiry with the House, and the congressional representative from Oklahoma, I believe, said, Madam Secretary, to Janet Yellen, you just bailed out Signature and Silicon. That's against the law according to the Dodd-Frank Act. What am I missing? And she said, you're right, Senator, you're right. But it was an uber majority vote between the FOMC, which is the Federal Reserve, myself, the FDIC, and the president, because it would have blown up the system in essence. It won't happen again, most likely. Other banks will be bailed in. And she said, well, before she said other banks will be bailed in, he said, so let me get this straight. If a bank fails in Oklahoma, will my constituents be made whole? No, sir, they won't. They will be bailed in unless it is too systemic and it is an uber majority vote of the FOMC, the president, myself, and the FDIC. The bail-in legislation is real. And so when we talk about how scary this could all get, I don't think people quite understand. Right. Rates go high enough and you see these banks implode. And how much strain can these banks take? You know, the third largest building in St. Louis, the former one AT&T Center, 44 stories tall, third tallest building in St. Louis, was sold for $205 million in 2006. It just sold for $3.7 million. You too can own a 44-story office building in St. Louis for the low price of $3.7 million. Well, you're seeing this start to happen and spiral. It's all over the place with commercial real estate. The banks are on razor's edge, and we're told there's 50 or 60 banks that are critical right now. Well, what if it's more than that? What if we start to see banks get bailed in? What happens when there's a global realization that dollars don't need to be held? These things are real. And the question is, are the actions of our leaders, has it been done to incite this, to accelerate it, to reset the system, to blame villains, rather than falling on the sword for brain dead monetary policy and really irresponsible fiscal spending? I don't know. Ask yourself, either it is too dumb to not be planned, or our leaders are just completely and totally inept.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more question that I'm going to defer over to Paul. You had mentioned cryptocurrencies a couple of times and how their rates of return are obviously from zero to whatever they are now. It's hand over fist. It looks fantastic on paper. How do you help guide the younger investors that tend to be drawn to these big quick hits to understand the real value and benefit of putting some of their their wealth back into precious metals.
You know, I can tell you're a smart guy. You ask the right questions and you get it. And I think that's the problem with this country in some respects. One of the problems is that instant gratification is not quick enough. My mentor, Richard Russell, once again said, you make 7% a year, you're a rock star. People have ignored and dismissed gold because it only has gone up by 9.9% per year. It's the tortoise, not the hare. And that's why at the beginning of this conversation, I said the greatest gift I was ever given was being allowed to understand the laws of compounding. It doesn't have to be compounding of interest, which is amazing, but the compounding of time as well. And I think cryptocurrencies have, and phenomena like Apple and Nvidia have created a illusion of markets that I've been doing this longer than anyone in my industry for 34 years. That's not how markets work. Maybe it is on some of these things now, but what it has done is created an environment of gambling and speculation. But as it pertains to the crypto communities, I was at the XRP convention recently, and I speak with Natalie Burnell and Mark Moss, Bitcoin guys, and I respect them. And I think that we should not be adversarial. I think that they're complementary in theory. You go into the same door for the same reason. You understand the system's broken, but the gold and silver camp go to the preservation side of the room, whereas the others go to the profit side. So I'm not going to speak poorly of cryptocurrency. I would say that it's not gold. It's not digital gold. It's a speculative investment. The central banks of the world, the most powerful players on the planet who know the playbook, are all buying gold, not crypto. But if you are so inclined to buy cryptocurrency, be smart and hedge your bet, and with your profits, take some out of your pocket and put it into gold and silver, which is real wealth, and be complementary instead of adversarial, because it makes your portfolio a whole hell of a lot stronger and hedges your bet. When Bitcoin, as impressive as its run has been, and all of the things that you can say positively about it, when the COMEX got a contract behind it and the ETFs got involved, it lost its purity in my mind, and it scares me. Doesn't mean I don't have a little bit and dabble in it, and some theta and a tiny bit of XRP. I mean, but not enough to where it will ever kill me if I lose it. And I think the Swiss have a philosophy that I've followed my whole career. It's 300 years old, where the base of your financial pyramid would be things like paid for real estate, gold, and cash. The middle portion, 20%. Now the base of your pyramid should be 60% or more. The middle portion would be treasuries earning 5%, or utility stocks throwing off a dividend. The top 10% would be, in my world, mining shares or cryptocurrencies, I guess. The theory is you lose every penny in the top 10, you make nothing on the middle 20. As long as you're making your steady, slow, snail-paced growth on the base of your 60, you don't go backwards. And in a perfect world, you kill it on the top, you do great on the middle, and the base is inconsequential. But it's inverting one's pyramid to speculation right now that is a very dangerous thing to do. And in particular, you look at the stock market, you got 2 or 3 stocks holding up the entire indice. And the weighted average of all of these big 3, 4, 5 stocks are enough to create an illusion that everything is great. But the stock market and the economy have detached from one another. And it's a trap in my mind. Right now, I think it's not about return on, it's about return of where we are heading. So not a Bitcoin hater or a crypto hater, but if you are going to own it, understand the virtues of taking some of those chips off the table. It's like going to Vegas. You keep playing, you're going to lose. Yeah. Put some chips in your pocket, so when you walk out, you can go up to the cage with the pocket full of chips, you know?
There you go. I love it.
When she says you got nothing left on the table, you actually got something you can walk home with.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, my wife thinks I've never lost at a casino ever. So, you know, let's not clue her in on the truth.
Hey, man, you are very, very well-spoken, educated man. I think everybody can realize that. You continue to do interviews like this, whether it's with us or many, many others around there. What keeps your drive going to continue to sit down with us at 9 p.m. at night on a Wednesday afternoon, or tomorrow, whatever it's going to be, or even into next week, what continues to drive you to do this? And we would love to have you back on, and we could talk
Dude, I'd
about
love to come
every
back on.
one of these topics that we touched on so lightly, and could continue on just on a certain topic, right? But what's your drive? What is your driving force to keep you going?
I come from nothing, and I'm very proud of the company I built. You know, it always bothers me. You'll get people say he's talking his book, and you know, I hate how cynical the world has become, where you know you can't build a business that your family would be proud of, your kids, your parents, that yourself. We've never had a customer complaint in 10 billion in sales. I started this company before the internet. I've spent more time at Miles Franklin than I have anywhere and in particular in my mind than I've done anywhere in my life. We've done enough business where I don't need to do this. I will tell you, I think about it all the time. Honest to God, I think about it, and it drives me in the respect that it's someday we all need to meet our maker, look our kids in the mouth or in the face on our deathbed and say, you know, I did the best I could. I tried my best. I'm not trying to be trite. I'm not trying to be sensational. I don't know what it is, but I feel that over the last 4 years, when I started doing these, I was amazed with the response. I rarely get really nasty comments on the interviews that I do. That interview you mentioned with Michelle McCory, the first one I did with her 2 years ago, at 1.5 million views, the most views that any video on Kitco on YouTube has ever gotten. Nice. And it blew me away, the response and the comments that people say. For some reason, I have the ability to, I guess, maybe take complex economic issues and try and explain them. And I don't know, man. It's kind of, it struck me that I get emails from all around the world saying, please keep doing what you're doing. You're helping me. You're teaching me. And it just turned into something that I feel, I don't want to say I'm supposed to be doing this or it's my mission. All I can tell you is that I feel that I'm doing my job. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm trying to help people best I can. And I think about putting myself out there the way that I do. It gets a little scary sometimes. Everywhere I go, people say, you're Andy Schectman. I know you. But all I can tell you, man, is I feel it's what I am supposed to be doing. And nothing has changed my life more than the 4 years that I've been doing this. I've been running this company for 34 years, but for 4 years on YouTube, my life has changed in ways I can't explain to you. And it's an amazing way to connect with people all around the world. And I guess all I can say is that I just feel that it is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I like doing these. It's a little bit tiring, and time management's tough for me, as you know. I had that to pivot a little bit on these, but I don't know. It's just something that I feel very strongly about, resonates with me in my soul, I guess. Connecting with guys like you and all the people out there, it's a special thing. That's all I can say, I guess. I don't know.
I think it comes down to one simple word, and I could tell from the whole interview, and probably Husky as well, it's you're very, very passionate on what you're talking about. It's not kind of like you were trying to get in. You're not trying to scare people. You're trying to inform people.
Oh yeah.
And
well,
it's
and
very,
I
very
love
passionate the way it comes out. It is.
I'll tell you something though, you guys, I am scared. I mean, for the first time in my life as a father,
and that's okay.
Kids, I'm scared.
That's exactly right. That is okay to be scared. It's a natural thing, and it's great to have conversations like these so people can have a chance to look up the information that we've talked about. And if they don't believe us, they can look it up themselves and say, you know what? He knows what the hell he's talking about.
Here's what I would tell people to look up. And thank you for such kind words. And, you know, part of it is that I knew I was right for a long time, and there were a lot of people telling me I was crazy and I was wrong. Very powerful people in this industry, and a lot of them have apologized to me. And I started doing this in 2019 and talking this path. Here are the things that people should look up. I would look up the Belt Road Initiative. I would look up gold as a tier 1 asset by the Bank of International Settlements. I would look up Project Enbridge. I would look up the unit and read the white paper. I would look up the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All of these things that we've talked about are massive, and the Western media doesn't do a poor job of reporting it. They do no job. And on a macro perspective, this is the biggest story of our lives, and no one is talking about it. Most of the people I talk to don't even know that the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia and how important it was, or why the dollar has been considered the world reserve currency, and the fact that Saudi didn't sign the exclusive agreement, what that really means. These are very important times. I guess I'll say it this way. If I had a gun to my head, I would say if you are not a contrarian, you're damn well doomed to be a victim. And if you are fully invested in dollars, you're damn well doomed to go broke. And I mean that in my soul. Hopefully I'm wrong, but unconventional times call for unconventional decisions and thought.
Wow.
Awesome. But I'd love to come back. You guys get it. And it's a privilege and an honor to speak with people like you. And it's what I mean. This is the whole fun part of what I do. And hopefully some of the people that you speak to get something out of it. And if they will allow me to come back, I'd love to do so.
Oh, we would love to have you back, and we'll have your contact info in the description section below.
Yes, all that'll be down below for sure. Well, man, we appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with us, and keep doing what you're doing. And I'm sure we will see you back here
anytime. You know, with the big BRICS meeting in October and the election in November, as the Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times. These will be interesting, but I'd love to come back and pick up where we left off. So happy 4th to you both, and everyone out there. Look forward to chatting with you guys soon.
Thank you, Andy.
Bye, guys. Enjoy the day. Later on.
Bye-bye. And guys, don't forget, we've got the 5-ounce giveaway. Information on that is in the description section below. Hey,
full of knowledge. That was a great show. I hope. Leave us a comment down below. Let us know what you thought. Let us know if you're going to look any of that information up. Let us know if you think it's just a line of bullshit. But I wrote down a bunch of notes myself.
Seriously, and it was good.
It was. And let's
catch you guys on the next one.
Catch you guys on the next one, and enjoy your fireworks tonight. All right, Husky.